what it takes. City of dreams, city of gang. You don't believe in no fate.
Alright guys, so it's finally time for my Cyberpunk 2077 review, and I've been debating a lot back and forth. I wanted to do this back to back with my Assassin's Creed review because that's very long, and this is probably going to be very long, and they're both similar style videos, but the game's been out for almost a month now by the time you guys see this, and I think it's about time we make a video on Cyberpunk. And so when thinking about the game and finishing it up and looking at my notes and everything, I've come to the conclusion that I don't want to talk about performance or bugs or any of that stuff, right? I'm going to briefly touch on it here in a second, but there's plenty of videos out there that can show you every single bug, and trust me, I have a file of all of them that I ran into, and it's a big ass file, right? And we could sit here and talk about it for hours and hours, but that would just drag the review out and you'd be hearing the same shit that you've heard everywhere else. So let me just say these two things really quick about performance and bugs, and then we'll move on. So I finished Cyberpunk 2077 in about 55 hours, doing all the side missions and world events and police scanners and all that stuff that was available to me. Obviously the main missions included. And so within those 55 hours, 35 of it was played on an Xbox One, and the other 20 was played on the Series X. And so within my 35 hours on the Xbox One, I had 16 crashes. And I don't mean freezes, little things like that. That happen constantly. I'm talking either crashed my game and brought me back to the dashboard or shut off my Xbox entirely. Now on the Series X, I only had 2 crashes during those 20 hours. Now, this could be because, the game had been out for multiple weeks and had been fixed, but even to the point where the game had been out for 2-3 months playing on the old Xbox, it was still crashing constantly. So now that we just have that out of the way, the other thing I want to talk about is my problem with this game's release, just as a whole. Right, again, I don't want to rant for the whole video about this, but this game should have been delayed an entire year, right? It doesn't come out for last gen. Xbox One, PS4, you're not playing it, alright? It comes out next gen and PC only, and in another year from now to get everything fixed, all the bugs fixed, all the crashes, all the problems that the game has, flesh out the world some more, right? That would have made this game significantly better, because it is night and day going from an Xbox One to a Series X. And let me just show you some quick comparisons. So again, this is me on an Xbox One trying my hardest in photo mode, trying to make this game look good. Alright, I messed around with this multiple places, multiple times a day, different sets and everything, trying to make this game look as good as possible in a spaced form. Then on the Series X, I tried to make the game look as bad as possible, and they do not even still look like the same game. It's not close at all. It's the lighting, the frame rate, everything. It's a huge difference. And let me show you a cutscene, I guess that's what you want to call it, from the Xbox One version. Again, spoilers in this video. And this is fairly early on, but there will be more spoilers later as we get into story. But just look at their movement and how it's kind of stuttery, as well as just the overall textures of a lot of things, particularly the skins of the characters, and even the lighting in some places isn't great. And then when we switch over to the Series X version of the game, again, it's a different setting, and it's a different mood and atmosphere to the scene, but just the character model itself looks significantly better. I know people are going to say, oh, well, you changed the framing, you're outside, this looks better here, but just look at the texture quality on her clothes, her face, the ambient lighting in the background, the textures of the ground itself. Everything looks so much better, as well as just the frame rate. Her movement is so much smoother and just more precise, and it's not perfect by any means, right? I wouldn't say this is, a game-breaking game graphically. It doesn't look great. Even on PC on its highest settings, it's not the most impressive looking game I've ever seen. But for it to, at least in my opinion, run acceptably, Series X and the PS5 are a bare minimum for this game, and this isn't even a main mission. The other cutscene you saw was a main mission. They put a lot of work into that. It's setting up the entire story. It's significantly more important than this cutscene. This really doesn't have any impact on the overall game at all, right? And this looks 10 times better. And so like I said, wasn't going to rant about any of that. We got our 5 minutes of graphics and performance and launch and all of that stuff out of the way. Now let's get into the actual game. So you start out the game choosing between 3 different life paths: Nomad, Corpo, or Street Kid. And then you customize your character, which of course I can't show much of at all. And so ultimately this decision does not matter that much, both the choice of your life path and your character customization, because you never see your character except for menu and in the final cutscene. And I guess when you look in mirrors, if you decide to look in mirrors for some reason. But more importantly, the life path choice really is not important. It gives you a different intro to the game, and it gives you a few different side missions and meaningless dialogue options here and there. But other than that, the choice at the beginning really doesn't make that big a difference. I wouldn't say it's worth, going back and reloading and playing on a whole different style of character, right? This time playing as a Street Kid, and this time a Corpo. Realistically, your gameplay and story are all going to be almost exactly the same. Regardless of what life path you choose, you end up meeting this guy named Jackie. I chose Nomad, so I meet him through a smuggling mission, and so you end up becoming friends and moving into Night City and kind of working with him and doing jobs. And so here's where my problem for the game immediately starts with the story. Instead of introducing you to Night City and having this really interesting game of, working with the different gangs and different members of the city and different faction leaders and all that stuff in order to kind of build up your name and reputation, kind of have an honor system type thing to get bigger and bigger jobs and make more money, they just put all that in a cutscene. They put all of the interesting stuff of introducing the player to Night City and the just people in Night City all in a cutscene. So your character is accustomed to the place, the people, and the player is just completely blind, right? I hated that. That was the first thing that, pissed me off about this game. And that's just the first of many, so we got plenty more to go. And so essentially this is how the game starts, right? You do a few jobs here and there, kind of letting them teach you the tutorial of the game. And then after that, you go and do this heist with Jackie. And again, we're talking spoilers here. So, spoilers for the last time. If you haven't beaten the game or care about spoilers, there you go. So you end up stealing this chip. Long story short, Jackie dies. They put the chip in your head, and it has this Johnny Silverhand's, Keanu Reeves' character's consciousness, I guess is the simple way to put it, on this chip that you have in your head, and now you are dying and he's taking over your body. And this is the plot of the game. Now, let's back up a bit, talk about Jackie dying and just the heist as a whole. So personally, I think the heist is relatively boring. It's probably about an hour of sitting and watching, and then 10 to 15 minutes of gameplay. And I mean, I know I'm trying to set up the story, but I just think it could have been done a lot better. And my big problem with the heist is Jackie's death, right? So, and this all ties back to that cutscene. So they introduce you to a character your first hour, or most likely if you're not a crazy person like me and just play main story, the first 30 minutes, and then again, if you just do main story, another 2 or 3 hours later, they kill him off, right? And so, a problem with this is your friendship, your relationship, everything, with all of these characters within Night City, was in that one cutscene. You have no attachment, you don't know why you like this person, you don't know this person's character traits, especially Jackie when they kill him so early on. I don't like Jackie, only thing I know is that he steals stuff. That's the only character trait, then he's Spanish. Those are the 2 things I know about him. Alright, everything else you learn about Jackie, you learn about after he's dead. You don't learn about from Jackie. Right? And so I didn't care when he died. I didn't have any emotional attachment to him. And along with the bugs, it broke the scene. But I just couldn't care less with Jackie's death as a whole. And that was kind of my problem with the game at the start. And it just kind of spiraled down from there. But, good news, positive time. After the heist, the game opens up, gives you a lot of side activities and quests and gigs and jobs, whatever they decide to call them, and of course main stuff too. And this is where my other big problem with the game comes in. So if we look at something like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which I just reviewed, or The Witcher 3, which a lot of people are going to be comparing this game to for a very long time, and Cyberpunk, let's compare these 3 games, right? The Witcher 3 obviously has good gameplay mechanics and good story and all of that. People praise the game for its side mission, and I said the same thing in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. It has very good and engaging side missions, right? And so the problem with this is that Cyberpunk kind of has a different aspect of that, I guess I could say, and I'm trying to find a way to explain this in a way that makes sense. And if you look at The Witcher and Assassin's Creed, they have a strong main story, and then the world is built up and, surrounds them and kind of reinforces the main story with the side missions. Cyberpunk's problem, at least in my opinion, is all of the side missions. Most of the side missions are better than all of the main missions. I could not care less about the main story. I don't think the main story is interesting. I don't think anything that happens is cool or interesting. There's not really any character moments in the main story. It's like the main story is the outline, and it's used in order to introduce you to characters, and if you want any sort of character development or, personality or just learn anything about the world, you have to go do side missions. Other than Johnny, you really don't get any, character development or arcs or growth out of any of the characters. And so something I wasn't planning on bringing up, but is a problem I have with a lot of RPG games, is RPG games with character customization and character creation. The whole point of these things is to, put yourself in the character's shoes and just be able to play as yourself and make choices as yourself. But then my problem with this is it eliminates all hope and all availability for character arcs or character development or any kind of character traits within the main character. Now, I'm just talking about your first playthrough. Obviously, the great RPGs you can play through again, and, this time you're going to play as an asshole, this time you're going to play as a nice person, this time you're going to play as, a gung-ho guy, this time you're going to play as a street brawler. You can play differently, but typically first playthroughs in RPG games, you play as yourself, the decisions you would make. And so, if you look at something, games versus games that do and don't have character customizations, like Witcher 3 and Assassin's Creed, where they have a central character, Mass Effect, and you look at something like Fallout, Cyberpunk, those types of games where you're making your own character. And again, I'm not trying to trash on any of these games, but personally, I like a pre-made character that has their own motivations and arcs and all of that stuff, so that you at least have one strong character. Where as Cyberpunk, if you're just playing the main story, which is what I believe, because this is a so widespread game, a lot of people are doing, nobody in the main story has any sort of redeemable traits or likable traits at all. Right? I can't think of, maybe Takamura is the only likable person within the main story that has any sort of nice traits. I guess that's the word you want to use. But let's talk about the side missions and my problems with the side mission. So I don't know if you want to call them jobs or gigs or NCPD scanners, whatever you want to call them. Every single marker on the map, other than buying cars, I did. And so let's talk a little bit about why this game's good side missions are a problem for its main story, right? And so, like I said earlier, all of the character development and personality and all of that is left to the side missions. If you want to learn more about the Nomads and Pan Am and all of those people, side missions. You want to learn more about Samurai and Johnny and his band, side missions. Rogue, side missions. River and the NCPD, side missions. The mayor race and someone trying to assassinate, any of one of the people running for mayors and brain controlling them, side missions. And, not all of the side missions are great, don't get me wrong. There's one at the end where there's a pop star, I think, and you have to find out that her boyfriend's cheating on her and she kills him or something. I don't know. That one was pretty boring. Again, they're not all great, but a majority of the side missions are much better than the story. And I've said this in other videos. I would have rather had a full game on multiple of the side mission arcs rather than what the main story is here, right? The Nomads and third people, that all seems super interesting, taking out transports and all that stuff and just trying to survive, being outcast from the city. Would have been a great game, would have rather played that. Being a detective in Night City and going through all the crime and just like the crazy people milking people as cows and stuff like that, super interesting, would have rather played that. Being a detective and trying to figure out who's trying to assassinate the mayor and brainwashing people, super interesting, would have rather played that. There's literally missions where you talk to a vending machine, a literal vending machine that is sentient, that is more interesting than anything that happens in the main story. Another side mission arc, there's a talking pistol, more interesting than anything that happens in the main story. You get my point, right? All of the side content is really good, and typically that's not a problem. But when the side content is better than your main content, I don't want to play your main content, right? I would rather just go play a game of your side content. So I find myself doing all of the side missions, driving in circles, waiting to get more side missions, so I wouldn't have to play the main story, because it is so boring. And that's another problem I have with the main story. So let's go ahead and finish up. Now that I've talked about a few side missions, let's finish up my problems with the story. So the heist happens depending on your playstyle and how fast you play and what side missions you do, relatively 5-ish hours into the game. And then you get the title card of Cyberpunk 2077. And so this is typically, again, if you like this game, please, especially the main story, please tell me in the comments why you like the main story, because I don't get it. Alright, side missions in the world and all that stuff, totally got it, don't need to clarify. Love that stuff. It's the main story that I have a problem with. So, from the Arasaka Tower mission, where you do the heist and get Johnny in your head, from there to pretty much the end of the game, it is go to person A, see if they can help me, can't help me. Go to person B, see if they can help me, can't help me. Go to person C, see if they can help me, can't help me. And then you keep going and going and going, and then finally, of course, you get to the end of the game and you have a decision to make. And so, again, we'll talk about gameplay here in a second, because that's a whole nother problem. But it's a lot of boring, just setup missions, right? And that would be fine if the payoffs were worth the setup, right? The amount of time you have to wait for Takamura to call you to start the parade heist and the setup you have to do, it's just not worth it. The parade mission isn't that cool. Like, it's fine. It's an okay mission. It's not a bad mission by any means, but it's not the coolest thing I've ever played. Right? I shouldn't have to run around waiting for people to call me. And I guess if we're going to talk about that now, let's talk about that now. People calling you. Why is... Oh, boy. The phone in this game, I like a lot. I like the texting system. I think it's interesting. It gives you more dialogue and context and character development and all of that and personality, like Takamori not knowing how to take a selfie and stuff like that. All that stuff's really interesting and adds layers to the game. My problem is that a lot of missions you either have to call people or wait to call people, wait for them to call you. And there's no system in place that tells you how long you have to wait or anything like that. It's just go do stuff and they'll call you eventually. And there's a time skip system in this game. Within the menu, you can skip night and day, stuff like that. I skipped years. It was Cyberpunk 2084, me trying to get people to call me. Alright? I mean, it's just waiting for people to call you. I don't understand why they thought the system was good. I mean, I know why they put it there, so that you would go explore and do side missions. For people like me that do all of their side missions and then do main missions later, you're stuck doing nothing and just wandering around and looking at the empty world waiting for people to call you. And it gets very boring and repetitive. And so that's just my main problem with the story, is that it's very boring, stringing you along to the end, trying to make you explore the side content, which personally I know, or at least I think that they know, is better than the main content, because they make you go do it so much between missions. And so you're going from person to person, you finally get to the end of the game, and you have a decision to make, right? You're going to go assault Arasaka Tower. I'm not going to explain the whole reason why. Most of you have beaten and played this game by now. And so you can go with either Rogue and Johnny, letting Johnny control your body. You can take Panam and her people, or you can go by yourself and take Arasaka's deal. Those are your three options, right? And there's a fourth option, and then once you get inside the tower, there's more options. Let's talk about that first scenario, because this is going to be controversial to a lot of people. So let me just run you through my thought process of these decisions so you can kind of come to the conclusion that I came to, or not. But your top option is to go by yourself, and so you're stumbling over yourself, you're passing out constantly, you're dying. So my thoughts is, you're literally going to fall over halfway through the mission and die, and you're not going to complete, your mission. You're just going to die for no reason. There's no point in doing that. I didn't want to go with Panam and her people because I'm not going to have her people and the nomads, which to me was the most interesting part of the game. But I'm not going to let her people and all of them get killed just for me. And then the last option was go with Rogue as Johnny. Now, here's my dilemma with this game as a whole, right? And I think this is kind of what makes you decide if you like the story or not. I fucking hate Johnny Silverhands, right? I don't know how anybody can like him. He's a terrorist. The one time you let him have control within the main story, he goes and betrays your trust and does stuff that he said he wasn't going to do. And he's just a terrible person, in my opinion, all around, right? And so I end up, again, really quickly, as you saw, choosing to go with Rogue and Johnny just because I was like, whatever, I don't like any of these options, that's what I'm going to choose. And then I see this other option, right? And my goal from the beginning of the game was to kill Johnny. I hated him. Every cutscene, every time I saw him, I tried to shoot him. I hate him. And I hate V. No one in this game is a good person, except for River. River is the only good person in the game. And so I get the decision. I know that this option will kill Johnny for sure, right? I don't know what the outcome the other ones hold, right? I know that this option, I kill Johnny, he's dead, I take him out. That was my goal in the game, right? And V is supposed to be you, so vicariously. And so I chose to kill myself, therefore killing Johnny. And a lot of people I talk to don't like this option, don't like this choice. But you know what? Again, if you look at the game from a you've beaten it perspective, knowing all of the endings, knowing what's going to happen, obviously this isn't the best choice, right? You don't get to play the last level, and we'll get into that more later. But if you look at it from a first time playing, my perspective, you absolutely hate Johnny, and this guarantees that you kill him. Well, then this is the best option, right? Again, didn't want Pan and her people to die, I didn't want Rogue to die, and I didn't want to just go and end up failing and falling over halfway through the mission, dying and letting Johnny take over. So, this guarantees his death. It puts you in third person for some reason. I have to look at this stupid helmet on my character's head. And then you zoom out, and you kill yourself. End of game. That was the only enjoyable part of the game, was getting to kill myself. Alright, so through the story, if you want to call it a story, it's kind of just a long fetch quest, and that's my main problem with it, right? You have Mission A, which is the heist in the beginning, and then fetch quest, trying to figure out who can help you until the end, and then, well, there is no Mission B if you killed yourself like I did, but most people, there's Mission B that ends it all. Alright, and even if you don't choose to kill yourself, the other options aren't much better, right? Again, letting Johnny take over, for me, not acceptable, hate him, not happening. Living for a couple of months, you just killed all of those people that you went in. You shot everyone in the tower, killing all of those people on your way in for you to live for 6 months. And anyone you brought with you died for you to live for 6 months. So, not really great options, in my opinion. So, that's what I chose. That was my ending. I think that's the superior ending. But that's up to you guys. So for me personally, Cyberpunk 2077's gameplay breaks down into 4 parts, and those are combat, loot, and exploration to kind of go together, and then dialogue between choosing which options you want to pick. And so we're going to start with the loot and exploration, just because those two go together, and I think they're the easiest to go over. So let's start out with exploration. So Cyberpunk has a fairly large map. It's not the biggest map we've seen, but it is a large map, and there's a lot of stuff to do, right? There's jobs, gig, NCPD police scanners, cyber psychos, all types of things that you can do. There's even stuff that's just not marked on the map that you can go find and just, discover by exploring around the map. And so, for me, again, a completionist, this is something that I really like. I sit down, I do all the side missions, all the gigs, all the exploring before I even touch any of the main story stuff. But with RPG games comes leveling, and specifically with Cyberpunk, you can't exactly explore the whole map. You have to at least progress somewhat in the campaign to get some new weapons and gear and armor in order to have the equipment you need to survive these higher level areas you want to explore. And so, like I said a bit in the story section, these exploration bits of the game are probably my favorite, going to just areas. In the NCPD scanners, there are so many. There's probably 15 per regions, and I believe there's 5 or 6 regions in the game. So there's so many of these, and these do get repetitive. It's just show up, kill the guys that are there, leave. It's usually nothing special. There's a few that stand out that are a bit more difficult than other ones, but for the most part, they're relatively the same. It's the jobs and gigs and all that stuff that kind of are unique and interesting, right? And so essentially there's 2 ways to play through exploring. You can go within your journal and just go down the list of missions and all that stuff, but that's not going to give you every single objective on the map. The way I chose to do it was go region by region, clicking on the nearest marker, whatever that happened to be, as long as it wasn't a main mission, and going to do that. This way you really do everything there is to do within the game. And so like I said in the story section, a lot of this is really well done. The only problem I have with the exploration and the world building and all of that is the leveling is insanely broken. And so when you open a map and look at the markers, you have difficulties. Even within your journal, you have difficulty. There's very low, moderate, I believe high and very high, or hard and very hard, something like that. And this is so insanely broken. I talked about it. I've talked about this game so many places. I want to say it's my worst or most disappointing games of 2020 video, but I'm not sure. But I talk about how moderate, the enemies are so brain dead, you can just walk right through them, right? On very low, it's the same way. They're just brain dead and stupid, do absolutely no damage. And the AI in this game is a whole nother thing to talk about, but the AI is terrible. They're so dumb. But let's stick to the difficulty. So, again, moderate, you can just blast through the enemies without a problem, right? Even if they have the mech dudes and turrets everywhere, you can just blast through them. Very rarely did I die to anything other than my own stupidity, right? But as soon as you get to something that is above moderate, right? There's very high and high, or, hard and very hard, whatever the difficulties are. If you go slightly above moderate, like it's a level 99 recommended and you're level 98, fuck you, you die in one shot. You are instantly dead. You don't get a chance. It's not like, oh, well, enemies are more aggressive and you have to take cover more, and, they do specific buffs and, nerfs to your character and stuff like that. No, it's just, if you get seen, you're dead. It's instant shot, one hit, that's it. And I found this very annoying, because I don't mind a challenge, right? I don't mind if it's a little bit more difficult in the area. I have to, use stealth more. That would have allowed me to invest points. Maybe I would have had to put points in that cool skill tree and do all of that, and maybe come back with some stealth points later, but no, I just literally could not do it. So I decided, fuck that, I'm not wasting my time on this. You come back and you do it later when it's on moderate, and you can just walk through the enemies. And let me try to find the clip that I'm talking about for you guys.
Attention all NCPD subcons. Suspected organized crime activity reported off Willow Street. APB out on one Shinobu Imai, convicted on multiple counts of human trafficking and forced labor. City officials are offering a reward for neutralizing Imai's criminal network in the Willow Street area.
But again, besides the difficulty and the terrible AI, the exploration here is really well done. There's unique encounters, and honestly, the most dynamic stuff choice-wise they have in the game is in this exploration stuff, where you can choose to follow certain paths and do different things, and choice in the story, and we'll get there, isn't that significant. But from exploration, let's talk about loot. So I'm sure you see I'm one of those absolute psychopaths that just pick up everything. I read what it is. I learned that you got to start eating and drinking the food and drinks so your inventory doesn't fill up in 20 minutes. I learned that relatively early on. But I pick up everything, and so I would say I saw a fair amount of loot in this game, right? And while nothing was bad, nothing was cool. I mean, this is one of my problems that I have with the gameplay, is that none of the weapons are that interesting or cool, right? There's one mission where you get, or I guess it's a side mission actually, you find a pistol that talks to you and automatically aims for the head, like that's cool. And then there's a sniper rifle, just a smart sniper rifle, nothing really dynamic about it, but that was really the only two cool weapons I found in the entire game. A lot of the pistols are boring. I find most of the smart weapons really cheap. The power weapons are insanely overpowered. You can just hide behind walls and shoot through the wall and wallbang people. It's just, all of the weapons were underwhelming. Like I said, didn't find any of them interesting. The grenades, I just had so many of. I had at least close to 500 frag grenades by the end of the game, and just never used them because they were so weak. You'd be ending up throwing 30-40 grenades at a boss before they go down. So I just decided about halfway through the game to just never use those. The management system as far as selling loot is terrible. They have a sell junk system, right, where you can just sell the random shit that you pick up. But as far as selling guns or armor or meds that you don't want, you have to individually click on each one you don't want. And when you have a full inventory, that takes forever, especially on last gen consoles where there's a second and a half of loading screen between selling each item. And it is an absolute pain in the ass for the underwhelming loot that is there. And further on loot, if you look at the main story, for example, you don't get a lot of loot, or at least I didn't, right? I, again, do all of my side content first, and I got a majority, I believe all of my weapons and armor from side missions and never, picked up another thing again. You get to a point where you do the higher level side missions, and you pretty much have the best armor in the game, and there's no reason really to pick anything else up except for money, and I had a lot of money. By the end of this game, I was around 800, 900,000, and I was just buying stuff to buy stuff, right? There's not a lot to buy in this game. There's not a lot to spend your money on. And while we're on the topic of loot, let's look at the cyber upgrades, right? For a game with Cyberpunk 2077, all about cybernetic enhancements to your character and futuristic stuff, there wasn't enough of this in there, right? As far as enhancing your character, really the only meaningful choices you had, a lot of this was just like plus 5% crit, plus 10% accuracy, plus 3% resistance to fire, stuff like that. And that's cool, but I don't give a shit about that. Give me something cool. The only meaningful cyber upgrades you can get is the hacking, which is what I devoted my points to, and we'll get to that more in combat. But double jumping, or big boy jumps, whatever the fuck you want to call it, and then which arm attachment you want, whether that's the wire, that's absolute garbage, mantis blades, which I found to not be great, the grenade launcher. Basically, I didn't find any of the arm attachments useful. I didn't use any of them. I found that hacking is pretty much the only worthy cyber upgrade in here. I feel like there could have been so many other cool things. Like, you could have had the ability to see enemies through walls with eye upgrades. You could have had like a respiratory system upgrade that like slows down time or something. You could have had so many different things that interact with the gameplay, so many different upgrades, and there's really very few here. And so the loot, I talk about this in a lot of Gate videos where I talk about RPG games and all of that stuff. Loot is super underwhelming, and that's one of the biggest problems I have with this game. So, speaking of loot, let's go ahead and transfer over to combat, because those two kind of go hand in hand. I guess all of this goes hand in hand, right? If your loot and just what you're collecting and grinding for isn't interesting, then your combat isn't going to be fun and interesting, and that is probably one of my biggest gameplay problems with this game, right? Now, I know this isn't Witcher 3 or Red Dead 2 or even GTA, but this hand-to-hand combat, why is it even in the game, right? It's insanely broken, right? Your punches, unless you have gorilla arms, even with gorilla arms, do insanely little damage to the people you're fighting. But perhaps the bigger problem is the enemies themselves, right? they have like Halo levels of lunge on their attacks. You can be 10 feet away from them and they will hit you. And it's very annoying. And nobody wants to do these fights. They're not fun. If you're a low level especially and don't have a lot of money, you lose so much money doing these fights. But they are, I believe, literally the first side quest you get, right? And I did the final fight at the end of my game. I was very overpowered for the fight. Gorilla arms, gold level gorilla arms, everything. Still lost the fight. The leveling in this game is insanely broken. And just the melee combat, I get the mantis blades, those can be cool. And the katanas and the melee weapons, but I don't know if we needed hand-to-hand punching combat, at least what this is. Right, I would have rather just not had this at all. But let's focus on what you're going to spend most of your time doing, and that's gunplay, right? And so, while the gunplay can be satisfying, there's very few guns that are satisfying, right? The only guns, again, I found that were interesting were 1 or 2 pistols and a sniper rifle, right? All the shotguns, any of the power weapons, basically, with specific scopes that let you see enemies through walls, made them insanely overpowered. The smart weapons were cheap. The recoil in the game was a bit off for me on a lot of weapons. Some weapons, it was just insanely too much. And other weapons, it felt like there was no recoil. And if you're not overpowered for sections, if you go into areas and missions on level, the enemies are just a bit too bullet spongy. I'm sure you'll see in a lot of my clips from later in the game, the non-story stuff, right? I just have a pistol where I'm just running through, slamming people, headshot, 2 or 3 shots and they're down. Whereas in this clip here, I've shot this guy 4 or 5 times with a shotgun, right? And again, it's just a bit too bullet spongy for me. Even the bosses, again, as I played and got further, I was more and more overpowered, so I didn't have a problem with that. But early on, they were very bullet spongy, and so not loving the gunplay or the hand-to-hand combat, I chose to focus on hacking. And this is, to me, the only enjoyable part of this game, right? So as you level up your character, you unlock more and more skill tree points to spend. It's a relatively generic and boring skill tree, not worth, going over in detail. But essentially, there's hacking and combat and stealth and all that stuff on it. And so I focused all of my points on hacking. And it gets to the point where I could take out entire bases of enemies without even firing my weapon, right? You breach in and weaken them all to your hacks, make your hacks would cost less RAM. Of course, this is after I've bought the gold RAM chip that gives you 10 things of RAM, and that's essentially your currency for hacking, right? You ping all the enemies, and then there's you can set enemies on fire, you can short circuit them, you can make them suicide, you can detonate their grenades. There's all types of hacks that you can do to just take out whole groups of enemies silently, and that's kind of where I chose to put my points in and where to go with gameplay, just because I felt that the gun combat was not satisfying at all. But that could be because I didn't put many points, if any at all, into the actual gun skill tree, right? If you decide that your character is going to be a gunslinger and you're going to have every single critical and minute detail upgraded, then maybe you will like the gun combat. But I chose from the beginning that my person was going to be like a mechanic / hacker type character, and so that's where I went with it. And just the overall weak and spongy feel of the gameplay, I just didn't love. And gameplay is something that I knew wasn't going to be great going into this game. Most RPG games don't have the most innovative gameplay you've ever seen, right? It's mainly the story. But the problem with Cyberpunk, in my opinion, is the story is worse than the gameplay, right? And I just talked about the story for 30 minutes, so I won't rant about it, but the story doesn't have the power to pick up where the gameplay falls short, right? The side missions and the exploration kind of do that, but not enough to carry both the story and the gameplay. They could definitely carry one or the other. I feel that any of the side missions could have been an insanely more interesting story, but again, that's just my thought on combat specifically. But let's move on to dialogue options and choice and all that stuff, because this is, again, one of my other big problems with Cyberpunk. So being an RPG game, Cyberpunk gives you a lot of choices, both in the main story and while exploring through the side content. And my problem with this, and with a lot of games, right, if you look way back to Telltale time, like Walking Dead stuff, the dialogue options in the beginning, right, at least in the first 2 seasons of that game, a lot of the options you chose had consequences and had different endings, different characters lived and died and all of that stuff. And then as we've gone on, those games, kind of the choices started to make less and less and less of a difference, and I think that kind of leaks even into other RPG games where you're making a lot of choices within the dialogue, and it's just to make choices, right? They don't really have any significant impact, and those are good. I've made a whole video on this. Those are good, those are fine, right? Those need to be in the game, but you also need choices that matter and make a difference. And within Cyberpunk's main story, those aren't there, right? Essentially, you choose your life path, and you choose your ending. And that's pretty much the only meaningful choices you make, right? All of the other meaningful choices are within the side activities, right? The exploration, the jobs, the gigs, all of that stuff. Choosing to, help this guy that has a gun and is going crazy, needs his pills or whatever, or not helping him and just killing him, or choosing to do this stealthily or loud, or all these other options that are within the side activities, right? Even one of the early on main missions, before you even get to the title card of the game, the choice, while there is a choice, ultimately doesn't result in that big of a difference. 90% of the time, you're going to end up shooting out of this place either way. And I think that's a big problem with Cyberpunk, is that there is a lack of choice, and where there is choice, there isn't really any consequences for the choices that you choose, right? It seems like, oh, well, I got this cool and dynamic choice that I made, and it resulted in us shooting out of here instead of sneaking out of here. But ultimately, if you look it up or ask anybody else that played, they chose something else, it still results in the same outcome. A big thing they emphasized within all of the pre-game advertisement for the game is this choices you would have based off of skill trees and your life path. And other games do this skill tree stuff, right? Like, if you have this level of persuasion or charisma, or X and Y, you have different dialogue options, and typically those are really helpful to you, right? You invested skill points in your skill tree to get these extra dialogue options, but here they're just little, tidbits of lore and just fun little add-ons. It doesn't really get you anything unique or interesting. And my bigger problem with that is the life path choices, right? If you go into a conversation and there's a choice where you can choose to speak as a nomad or a street kid or a corpo, right? Each of those dialogue options should result in something different. While what you're saying is different, ultimately it pretty much comes down to the same thing. Again, these are things that you're devoting points, or you could have been devoting these to increase stealth or crit chance or resistance to poison or something like that, but you chose to spend these on dialogue tree options. And in most games, like I said, they usually result in something worth the payoff, but here I feel like it's just giving you more lore and a little bit more context to the situation, but it's never anything useful or unique. And from here, really, it's just nitpicks the rest of the way, but things like the checkpoints within the game are terrible, right? You can go through this long, hefty story section and then die to something stupid like fall damage breaking, and then have to restart the whole mission, and just, that's something that I ran into a couple of times that annoyed me. I feel like they give you too many free cars, and again, if you just do the main story, you're not going to have this problem, but you end up with 5-ish free cars just from exploring and doing side content. And while I like this because this is that unique loot that they need to give you and reward you with for doing these things, none of those cars are cool, and it just clogs up the menu, and then you have way too many cars. But I'm one of those people in GTA that only has one car in the garage, and you don't need a 10-car garage if you can only drive one car at a time. So I'm one of those crazy people, so maybe this is just me. But if I had to complete a overall quick summary, positives and negatives list, the only positives I really have for this game are the hacking and kind of the side activities in the world surrounding everything. practically everything else, the story, the loot, the driving, the dialogue, the characters within the main story, specifically Johnny, everything else I'm not a fan of, right? And so that brings us to our final rating, and this is going to piss a lot of people off. So what I've decided to do, and I'm pretty sure I talked about this in the beginning of the video, but it's been 45 minutes, I am going to take 3 points off of my total score. 1, for falsely advertising the game for PC only. Secondly, for the bugs and crashes. And thirdly, for how terrible this game looks on last gen. This game should not have come out on last gen. It should have been delayed another year. Alright, or both. Alright, and so, thinking about everything, my rating scale 5 is average, 7 is good, 4 is below average, 3 is bad, and so where would I put this game before those graphics and bugs and all that stuff? Just the core gameplay and story, I would give this a 6. Right, it's not bad, it's slightly above average, right, and without those side missions, right, if you just do the main story, this is maybe a 5, right, but with the side missions and exploring and going around and meeting reptile people and all that stuff, it brings it up to a 6. If this game was more side missions and less story, if it would have focused more on the nomads in Pan Am or River and that detective arc or any of that stuff, this could have gone up to a 7 or an 8. Any of those storylines I found insanely interesting. But again, so technically I guess there's 2 scores for this game, right? If you buy the game in halfway through 2021, you have it on next gen or PC, all of the bugs are fixed, you know, don't really care about the ethical side of the marketing and all of that stuff like I do, and you have next gen and PCs where the game looks good, it runs good and all of that stuff, then this game is probably a 6, maybe a 7 if you like the story and don't think Johnny Silverhand's a piece of shit. You know, maybe you get this game on sale $30, it's a good game, right? But at launch, on last gen, with the way the game was marketed, with only PC content, final score I'm going to give this game is 3. Right? It is below average, right? That's 4 is below average, 3 is bad. This game is bad, right? There's nothing I like in this game other than the side content. Alright, and that's a problem. The side content should be good, obviously, but it should reinforce the main content. I shouldn't come out of a game thinking, oh, I wish I had more of that, and this kind of relates, and again, I don't want to rant about The Last of Us 2 here, but this kind of relates to The Last of Us 2, and I talked about this in my most disappointing games of 2020, in that in The Last of Us 2, they show you a lot of the flashbacks with Joel and Ellie when he's alive, spoilers, and they show you a lot of these flashbacks, and my problem was that's the stuff I want to play, right? That's the interesting stuff, the relationship between Joel and Ellie. And so in The Last of Us 2, you're stuck playing through all this shit that you don't care about and don't want to play while you know the potential and the creativity for what you want to play is there because it's there in snippets throughout the game. And Cyberpunk is the same way, right? The stuff I care about and the stuff that I think is interesting, I want to play the Nomads and River and all that stuff, that's all there. But it's just in snippets and they chose not to focus on it, and that's what's interesting. Now, like I said, it's been almost a month since the game has been out at this point, and a lot of stuff's coming out, a lot of rumors coming out about how, well, Johnny Silverhands wasn't even a main character, he was a side arc, but then Keanu signed on and they reworked the whole story, and they cut whole sections of the story about hiding from Arasaka out of the game in order to get it out on time. So just a lot of stuff like that, a lot of stuff that with, what was it, The Last of Us 2 or some other game that came out recently where they just cut so much stuff out of the game to get it out. But overall, I am not a fan of Cyberpunk. If you guys like it, that's cool, that's great, I hope you enjoyed it. But personally, for me, just wasn't there. But hope you guys liked this video. Comment what you would rate this game, if you liked it, parts you liked, parts you didn't like, your favorite side mission, all that good stuff. Don't forget to subscribe, all that stuff. Follow me on Twitter. We got an Instagram going now. Go follow that, all Spartan Vision. And I'll see you guys on the next one.